Hello future MDs! Here's part 3 of our psychology review of the social science part of NMAT. Ito yung last part ng psychology lecture review natin. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't subscribed yet. Also, feel free to share this with your friends na magte-take din ng NMAT. Thank you! Let's start!
Right. So psychopathologies and therapy. So there's a difference between fear and anxiety. So a lot of people might say, oh, I'm so anxious right now. Though na pagpapalit siya from time to time, here's the difference. So fear is something that happens right here, right now for a reason. Anxiety is you're afraid of something that is in the future, basically. Yun lang naman yung difference niya. Si fear, may threat na in front of them that is actually happening within the present. Anxiety happens because you are at the present but your mind is thinking to the future. May takot ka na hindi mo alam kung bakit ka takot, and most probably it's because you're thinking of something in the future. Alright? So anxiety, let's talk about anxiety. Si anxiety kasi, it's again future-oriented and it is cognitive, physiological, and behavioral. May components siya ganon. So anxiety is okay, but there is something in disorders that you can differentiate it from. So there's anxiety disorders are unrealistic, irrational fears. So when you have a disorder, anxiety disorder, you already have a disabling intensity, meaning you cannot work, you cannot function properly. All right. So we have types of anxiety disorders. So first, let's talk about specific phobia. So specific phobia, meron kang takot for a specific thing. So for example, takot ka sa butterfly, takot ka sa ipis. Pero yung takot na yon is not just because takot ka. Yung takot na yon nakaka-disrupt na sa day-to-day life mo. For example, if you're afraid of heights, it's already a phobia, a specific phobia. If kunyari, hindi ka makaakyat sa overpass, hindi ka makadaan sa overpass, that's already a specific phobia. Pero kung takot ka lang umakyat ng overpass and yet you can still go for it, you're just afraid. So, ganun siya. Right. So next is social anxiety phobia. So ano yung difference niya from specific phobia? Si social anxiety phobia naman, there is one or more specific social situations. So this one, kunyari, takot mo is yung sa parties. You do anything and everything just for you to avoid that party. The specific place, the specific area, yun yung social anxiety phobia. Why? Because you're afraid of scrutiny and potential negative evaluation of others. Your phobia is not because of the specific area itself. Your phobia is to be scrutinized, and because maraming tao natatakot kang ma-scrutinize and magkaroon ng negative evaluation. So that's a difference between social anxiety and specific. Specific phobia, you're afraid of something, di mo alam kung bakit, basta takot na takot ka, and it's super irrational na. Social anxiety naman is your irrational fear is to get scrutinized. Right? Next is panic disorder. Si panic disorder, this is an abrupt thing. So you feel an intense fear or discomfort. So here are the physical symptoms, usually chest pains and breathlessness. And fear is usually is an alarm response. Okay, agoraphobia. All right. Si agoraphobia naman, halos parehas siya with social anxiety phobia, pero agoraphobia is something na these are the areas na usually takot ka. Dapat dalawa dyan, right? Or you need to have two of them, and it should occur for more than 6 months. Right? They are almost the same, but agoraphobia persists. Mas persistent si agoraphobia, and you need to be afraid of more than 2 places. So GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorders. So this is chronic or excessive worry. This needs, of course, more daily than not for 6-month period. So ayan, si GAD naman, hindi, so you're just really anxious about everything. Wala kang specific reason kung bakit ka natatakot, and it's already disabling you. Your anxiety is, you don't know why. So yun si generalized anxiety disorder or si GAD. Right? So we now have mood disorders. So si mood disorders, medyo mabigat siya. Ayan. So we have 2 types. We have only depressive symptoms and we have manic symptoms, which is for the bipolar disorders. Right? And then here, DSM-5, yun yung Bible ng psychology, because they discuss about what are the specifications for you to fall under a disorder. So in DSM-5, we have depressive disorders, which is the major depressive disorder, persistent these ones, and bipolar disorders. Right, I'll be discussing them. Okay, there we go. So we have major depressive disorder. Ang difference lang nila is usually sa weeks. So si MDD, we have 2 weeks. Si PDD, for at least half of the time for 2 years. Dapat yung mood mo is really, really low. And there are other 2 symptoms for depression. So yeah, and then there's premenstruational dysmorphic disorder. So this one usually happens to us women. Your mood goes really low during this time. And then disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So this one may outbursts ka naman. This is usually outbursts and persistent negative mood for at least 1 year beginning before age of 10. So this one, see dysregulation disorder, lumalabas siya before the age of 10 and it should happen at least 1 year. So for bipolar disorder, so we have bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. So ang difference nila is bipolar 1 is mas malala kaysa bipolar 2. So si bipolar 1, you have a manic episode. I'll differentiate something to you, which is the manic episode and the hypomanic episode. Si manic episode is basically mas malala kaysa kay hypomanic. During that manic episode of a person in bipolar 1, yung thinking nila is they're invincible. They are super, super high na to the point na may mga tumatalon off the building kasi feeling nila kaya nila lumipat. They want to run for presidency kasi feeling nila mananalo sila. That's your manic episode. So bipolar 2 naman, yung hypomanic is a little bit calmer than manic episode. And you also have major depressive episode. Both of them have depressive episodes. But ang difference nila is yung manic episodes. So si hypomanic naman is a toned down part of a manic episode. Which is kunyari, you overspend na things na kunyari, ang dami mo kinukuhang projects, ang dami mo kinukuhang work, and then after some time, realize mo sobrang dami, and then you would go back to the cycle of depressive episode. So ganun yung nila, cycle niya, si bipolar disorder. Na it's not what people usually think na mabilis, is usually a gradual thing. Alright. Next is cyclometia, which is recurrent mood changes from high to low at least 2 years without hypomanic or depressive episodes. So from cyclometia naman, yung mood mo from high and low, pero yung episodes mo dapat matagalan siya. So personality disorders. So we have personality disorders. We have 3 clusters. We have our odd eccentric, dramatic erratic, and anxious fearful. Usually we just call them cluster A, B, C. We have cluster A. Let's talk about cluster A first. So we have the paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal. Si schizoid, ang naman sa kanya is yung social relationship mo and restricted range of emotion expression. So si schizoid, siya, more of that type of person na pinupull out niya sarili niya from society. Yung thinking niya is out there, so parang sobrang weird, like really, really weird. Pero he's more of in a withdrawal. Ayaw niya makipag-usap sa ibang tao. Si schizotypal naman, siya yung super duper weird. Ayan, ito yung difference niya. Siya yung super duper weird, si schizotypal, sobrang odd niya na. Yung pagka-odd niya is sobrang halata na. And they have an odd thought and appearance and behavior. Sobrang ibang-iba na yung behavior niya. Sa schizoid naman, meron silang odd behavior pa rin, pero they try to isolate themselves. So here, if you do not have odd disorganized thought, appearance, or behavior, though they try to isolate themselves and they have some sort of odd thoughts from time to time. Now, since schizotypal and schizoid, they are usually asked, parents rin ba siya kay schizophrenia? They are not. So schizophrenia, you experience hallucinations and delusions naman. And schizophrenia has both of it also has the same things as schizotypal. Ang difference lang is schizophrenia may hallucinations and delusions na. Difference of hallucinations and delusions. Hallucinations is visual. Delusions is your belief system. Okay, so paranoid, distrust and suspicious ka lang. And for cluster B, cluster B is yung dramatic and erratic. Okay, so antisocial. Sa antisocial, hindi siya yung ayaw niya sa ibang tao. Si antisocial is a violent type of person. They have no regard for rules or any law, and they violate everything. The rebels of in personality. Okay. Next is the borderline. The borderline is from the word itself, borderline. They have instability of interpersonal relationships. They push others away and yet they want them to stay. They're just everywhere. So they have instability with self-image and they have a really, really high impulsive rate. Okay. Histrionic is usually those who are excessively emotional and attention-seeking. They feel like they are on stage. Dapat lahat ng attention is sa kanila. And ang malala for them is that they think everyone is in love with them. So that's histrionic personality disorder. Narcissistic grandiose, meaning they admire themselves and they want others to admire them and they don't have any empathy at all. They don't really care about others. They only think of themselves. Next is cluster C. We have avoidant. So si avoidant naman, meron siyang hypersensitivity to negative evaluation. So kapag they feel like they're being attacked or they feel like nafe-feel nila na may something wrong, they run away. So they try to pull themselves out of most of the time. Si dependent, they are very submissive. So here they have excessive need to be taken care of. So they cannot stand on their own. They need always to be some may kapartner dapat siya lagi, dapat laging may nag-aalaga and everything. And they have a fear of separation. Right, so let's talk about obsessive compulsive. So obsessive compulsive naman is they have a preoccupation with order, perfection, and control. Others might think this is good, but it's not because it's already when they see something, everything needs to be perfect, everything needs to be good. If it's not perfect, it's not good. They cannot move on. They cannot stop themselves from trying to go to another activity, which makes it already a disorder because it's already hindering them to have a life not a productive one. Next is frustrations, conflict, and stress. Right, so stress. So stress is a condition that occurs when a person must adjust or adapt to an environment. It is a complex set of reactions and it perceives threat to one's well-being that motivates adaptation. So stress, ano yung what gives out stress is stressors. So stressor is the source of or stimuli of stress. Pressure is something that it is an external demand. So there's a difference. Stressor is a source of stimuli of the stress, and pressure is something that needs to be urgently done, or there's an external demand or expectation of you. So there's a different types of stress. So we have the frustration-induced stress, meaning something is blocking your goal-directed behavior. It can either be environmental or personal. So environmental or social frustrations is goal-directed behavior. There's a blockage with your goal-directed behavior for something or somebody in the environment. So that's outside. External. Personal, meaning there are results from internal or personal reasons. And then you have fault and blame are not relevant here. So and this is more an intrinsic type of frustration-induced stress. Next is conflict-induced stress. So here, the stressor in which some goals can be satisfied only by the expense of others. So this is more of people-to-people conflict. So there's motivational conflicts, approach conflicts, avoidance conflicts, in-approach avoidance, multiple approach avoidance. Approach conflict, from the term itself, the person is caught between two or more alternatives in which a positive or potentially reinforcing. Avoidance is person is faced with several alternatives, which is a negative one. So approach is a positive one. Avoidance is negative or pushing something away. In approach avoidance conflicts, there's only one goal a person would like to reach, but at the same time would like to avoid. So there's a discrepancy in resolving the conflict. Multiple approach avoidance. So you face with a lot of alternatives, but it can go both positive or negative. Right? Neurosis versus neuroticism. There's a difference between the two. So neurosis is used in different ways related to abnormal psychological processes. Neuroticism is in personality. So there's a difference between the two. Neuroticism is actually used in the Big Five personality traits. It's actually used in tests. While neurosis is we don't really use it that much. It's already like diagnosed for depressive or anxiety disorders. And this is usually for obsessive thoughts or anxiety. So there's a difference between using neurosis and neuroticism. All right, for therapy, we're almost there. Okay, so let's run through this. So psychoanalytic theory is mostly just a talk type of therapy by Sigmund Freud. You can imagine like sitting in the long chair, laying down while you're talking to your psychologist. And then here, this approach explores how the unconscious mind influences your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. For Adlerian therapy, this is mostly a humanistic type of approach. So here, it's mostly about you for success and connectedness with others and your contribution to society. Now, next is existential therapy. It's like Adlerian, but here you applaud, you give a check to your capacities and what you can do. But at the same time, they also talk about your limitations. So, what are the things that your body cannot do or your mind cannot do? And you have to accept all those things. Person-centered therapy. This one, usually it's the person talking. It's the client who's usually talking, and it focuses on how they see themselves. Right. And then Gestalt, like how I described it in the past discussion, Gestalt means whole. So this time, the person presents life and challenges rather than delving into past experiences. The therapy's aim is for you to take responsibility of what happened rather than blaming other people. So that's the goal of Gestalt. Next is behavior. So we have behavior therapy. Do not be confused with CBT. There's a difference. So I'll be talking about that in a bit. So for behavior therapy, this is mostly just about mental health treatment. This is usually used for mental disorders. Okay, so the idea of this one is that you have to learn better behaviors and unlearn the unhealthy ones. Okay, this one is CBT. CBT is usually is quite known, which is a cognitive behavior theory. So this one, it is somewhat like behavior theory, but this time it also encompasses your thoughts, your feelings, and how do they influence your behavior. So instead of just your behavior in behavior therapy, CBT talks about more of how is your behavior, thoughts and feelings affecting each other, and how do you change your destructive and disturbing thought patterns. Last is your reality therapy. It's basically a form of counseling that views behaviors as choices. So reality therapy just talks about that you always have a choice on how you will behave in a specific situation. Right, almost there. So we have social psychology. Social psychology, here are just some terms that you need to remember. So attribution theory, this just talks about how you perceive the cause of success and failure for both self and others. Situational disposition, basically they just talk about why did they do that. Why did they do that? And usually in situation disposition, they did it because of their situation. Dispositional is assigning the cause of behavior to some internal characteristic of a person. So for example, sinabi mo na ginawa niya yon kasi mataray naman talaga siya. Ganon. That's how disposition attribution works. So they did a specific act because of a specific attribution of that person, of the specific characteristic of a person. Now, the process of assigning the cause of behavior to the situation or event outside the person's control is called the fundamental attribution error. So here, they assign the cause of behavior to some situation or event outside the person's control rather than some internal characteristic. Okay, here, self-serving bias, basically, you view yourself in a more favorable way. Attitude, this is the feeling that predisposes someone to respond in a particular way. Food and bar, basically, they start with a small request and then it goes higher and higher, bigger and bigger, until later it becomes a large request. A role, it's like Zimbardo's prison study, if I think you're familiar with that, wherein there is a prisoner and then there's guards. And what happened with that, because the people who played the guards felt that they had so much power, they abused the people who role played as the prisoner. So that's the Zimbardo's prison study. They set expectation in social settings, and that's how they behave. That's the role. Now, the cognitive dissonance theory, here they talk about that your attitude is not consistent with your roles, and that is why you change your attitude to reduce the dissonance, meaning the discrepancy between your attitude and your actions. Last, okay, social behavior. So conformity, basically, you adjust to the group standard, you conform, you just follow what the standard is. Obedience is complying with the rules and the order. Social facilitation is how the improved performance of a task in the presence of others. For example, like in school, diba? Like you have a group project. So here, you would do your best kasi biglang pala siya, individual. Kailangan nakikita ka kasi ng ibang tao na dapat magaling ka. So that's social facilitation. You improve yourself because there's a lot of people looking at you. Social loafing is the other way around. Social loafing is kapag you depend so much on other people that you exert less effort. Kasi you know that there's a lot of people in your group and there is no accountability to yourself. The individualization, I think, wrong spelling. Anyway, the loss of self-awareness and self-restraint because you are in the group. So basically, your identity is now the group and you don't have your own identity. The group polarization is the enhancement of a group's already existing attitudes through discussion within the group. And groupthink, this is the mode of thinking that occurs when the desire for harmony and decision-making group overrides a realistic appraise of alternatives. So basically, groupthink is what is the best thing, like everybody there thinks of one thing, even though that thing or that decision is not really that realistic. All right, we're done.